Hello, everyone. Oh, Alex, you made it too. Great. And we even got somebody from Iceland here. That's a particular honor, of course. So, well, thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm going to be very German. Well, it just turned out right on the minute, the time. So I was going to be very German and start very much on time. So let's do that. A few housekeeping items. Most of you, this is probably not your first webinar. I do these quite often, but I'm going to make it quick. So hopefully you won't be bored too much. So as you can see quite easily, there is a chat section over on the right. So if you have any question, we don't have a very large group today, so I should be able to monitor the chat. So you can just put your question in there if you want, or your comment. The other place to put questions and comments is if you go along the bottom, there is a area that's called Ask a Question. And the benefit of putting your question in there is that it's in a separate area. So I will very likely not miss it. And I can even mark it when I answer it. And then if you view the recording, you can actually jump to it and view the answer right away. So that's the preferred way to go. But the comment section work as well. So I'm going to try and make this a little bit interactive. I got quite a bit of work for you to show. I have quite a bit of film work, and I even have some aerials at the very end. And spoiler alert, it's not going to only be black and white either. There's actually some color in there. I mean, who would have thought, right? But I thought I'll put some color in, especially I'll talk about it a little bit later. The film work I'm going to show you is all in color, and most of the aerial work is in color as well. Okay, but I'm going to start off with a bunch of black and white. So if you're here for the black and white, don't worry, you get a lot of it. And then you can think about the color work as a little bit of a bonus article. How about that? All right, so cool. Thanks. We even got Sweden. And yes, Sandy, it is recorded, like all my webinars. And the recording usually is available about, I don't know, half an hour to an hour after I end. And you just come back to the same page that you're on right now. Then there will be a recording, and you can kind of scrub through it, and you can, watch it over again as much as you want. And Rick, you're probably commenting on my color stuff. I know it's great. So, um, Iceland. Well, where should I begin? I tried to count, and I ended up at something like 20 trips in the last 11 years. So I've been there a whole lot, and of course that's not even including all the stopovers, because I fly to Europe and back from Canada always when I can, always through Iceland. So oftentimes I just stop over for a day or two or three. So it's just my favorite country, and Finor, I could live there, and maybe this will happen one day. But today we're going to talk about mostly the Highlands. And I found this map online, which I think, kind of makes sense. This is the Highland National Park as it is proposed. Okay, so this does not exist, but as far as I know, somebody may correct me, but I think they're actually going to look at this and seeing if they're going to establish this. And of course, if this park ever becomes a reality, there's a few parks included in this that are already in existence, but this map still gives you a pretty good idea what the Highlands are. Right, the Highlands are the interior of Iceland, and interestingly enough, most people never go and visit that because they go and do the ring road. And the ring road is beautiful, and I definitely recommend that. Especially if it's your first time in Iceland. The ring road I think it's a good introduction. But let me say, to sum it up, let me say the first time I went into the Highlands proper, I felt like I discovered the country all over again. It is completely different from the ring road. And of course, as most of you probably know by now, Iceland has become quite popular recently. So the ring road actually tends to get quite busy, especially the South Coast, right? It tends to get quite busy, and you actually do see other photographers around. But if you go into the Highlands, of course, depends where you go, but the further you go into the interior of the country, the less photographers you'll see. And that's, of course, of particular interest for me. The other thing is you have not a whole lot of iconic scenes. If you go along the ring road, there's a lot of places that, I mean, if you Google Iceland, you'll see a lot of the places that, regular tourists, I suppose. That's not a negative. Don't mean that as a negative thing, but a lot of people they photograph the same thing, and it is beautiful, and I think you all should do it. I'm not trying to discourage you from that. And I'm in fact going to show you this is the very first picture I took in Iceland in 2012, right, on my first trip there. And this is not something I think that many people take. And I love the fact that this has now been renovated, so this lighthouse doesn't look like this anymore. And I'm very happy that I have this picture that shows it before it got renovated. As much as, of course, it's nice to have it, all done up and renovated and everything. But my very first trip, I went to Iceland to photograph lighthouses, not waterfalls. And, once I got there, I didn't even look at the waterfalls because, I was there on a mission. And my mission was lighthouses. And then, through the years, I went back, and I think it was my second trip when I did the I guess a little bit more obvious, a little bit more typical waterfalls. And it's still interesting, with all the photography awards that I've won over the years, this has won the most awards. And I almost didn't even enter this because quite honestly, I wasn't that proud of this work because I didn't think it stood out that much, right? And granted, when I did this, 2013, 2014, not as many people were photographing these waterfalls. That has picked up a lot, but still, it's a point in time, and I'm not going to show you a lot more of this work. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a backstory, how sort of my love affair with Iceland started, and this was definitely part of it. But you see, this is what I did about 2014, and then I shot some waterfalls again just a couple years ago, and now they're like this, and you see quite the difference, right? This is a lot less technical. This is a lot freer. This is not as static, in terms of my composition. I'm actually moving the camera while I'm doing a long exposure. Definitely recommend that to anybody that hasn't tried it. And to me, these have a lot more feeling, but more importantly, they kind of um, they represent something that is not a representational photograph of what my eye sees, but a little bit more of a distant memory, right? And I like this direction with my work now a lot more. But as many master photographers have told me, they don't particularly enjoy the work that they've done 10 years ago either. And I think that's actually quite normal because you develop, right, as a photographer as you go. So here you have it. And this is the first Icelander I met within minutes of setting up. And down there, you actually see that original lighthouse. I got we introduced each other, and I ended up going. There's a second lighthouse, a more modern one, and we ended up, giving a tour or getting. I ended up getting a tour, and it was one of the many many friendships, and we are still. Uh, we're still every time I go to Iceland, I try to see him, and we even set up one time. We set up an exhibition in the lighthouse of my work, and this was, with all the exhibitions that I've had, this was just very, very special. And you see the photograph there, of the old lighthouse that I showed you at the beginning. And there was even a musician, there was live music, and it wasn't a huge turnout, but it was mostly local. And then I had a workshop there, so I brought my workshop as well, which was a special treat. But I just love the fact that that the local community was that excited for hosting an exhibition. And I mean, I've never had an exhibition in a lighthouse before or since, and it was just really, really cool. And this is anachronist. So if anybody's in Iceland, I would say that photograph still hangs in that lighthouse, and you can go in. Um, and you can, of course, tour the lighthouse, and, they now have the tourist information of that little of Acronis in that lighthouse. So, um, it's, uh, it's really, really cool. So, um, anyway, this is this. Now, let's get to the Highlands. So here you already get a little bit of an idea what it looks like. The Highlands are not super high. Like, when you hear Highlands, you might think, "Oh my god, like, is it like 2,000, 3,000? Like, how high is it?" It's not that high, but it's not by the ocean, right? A lot of it is only 4, 5, 6, 700 meters above, sea level, but the weather changes dramatically, and you don't really have roads in most of the Highlands. You have, I guess, what's the best translation? They're called F roads or dirt tracks, right? So they are established tracks, but they're certainly, they're certainly not paved, and very often, they might be, underwater, and there are, famous water crossings that you have to go through. So you need a car that's a proper car. So here, that's one of the examples. This car actually has a snorkel, is, jacked up, so it's a bit higher, has larger tires, and it's certainly a 4x4, and it's not even a small one. It's a large one. It's a Land Cruiser, Toyota Land Cruiser that's been modified, and that's a sort of a minimum as I see it, that you should have to really comfortably go to the Highlands. Of course, it depends where you go, and here you can see a little bit larger. So you see how large the tires is, how jacked up it is, and this is pretty well the largest vehicle you can find for rent, unless you have some local connections, right? But anybody can essentially rent this kind of vehicle. You have to look for it a little bit. Not every rental agency has it, of course. It's got to be your local agency. It's not Hertz or Avis. But if you have a vehicle like that, you can pretty comfortably travel, most of the Highlands, even though conditions always change, and especially those water crossings. It behooves you if you actually check, and the ones that look deeper, they likely are deeper. And I've rescued, a few cars that got stuck, in the middle of a water crossing. So, and luckily, it never happened to me. But if it looks really bad, I literally, strip down and I try to walk through it, because that gives you an idea of how deep it is. And then, of course, the more you travel the Highlands, the more experience you get driving, and then you also have more confidence doing this, because, as I said earlier, a lot of these areas are pretty empty, not too many people around. So, it can be an issue. You don't want to be breaking down, in the middle of the Highlands. It might be hours, if not longer, until somebody comes. But this is pretty good. I have done in, October, last year, I actually rented, this van, and it doesn't really look like it, but this one is actually jacked up, and it does also have a snorkel, even though the snorkel doesn't come out, but at least it goes to the bottom of the windshield, essentially. So it is higher than what it usually is, like it's a higher air intake, and this little car was actually a van, was actually quite good. So if you don't go through, the really deep crossings, you can actually go pretty far. And I just thought I include this for anybody that maybe wants to go and do some Highland explorations themselves. This is actually what it looks like inside. So, you actually have a little, cooler box. You have a, portable stove, and you can crash in there, and you got a heater. So it's actually kind of a cool way. It's a cool thing to work out of, and if you know your way around, and you know sort of what areas to go to, you can get surprisingly far, with a vehicle such as that. So take a look around, and then I put this in. This is kind of your North America's, type SUV, right? Like a medium-sized SUV, and this is my dad. So, take a look. This gives you an idea of how high the snow is there, right? Like, my dad is standing there on the road. So, I mean, if it's that high, and it's not cleared, it doesn't matter what vehicle you have, because you're likely not going to make it. But just so you get an idea, it can really be pretty crazy, to find your way. Of course, if you go in the summer, then you can go considerably longer. But I do have some winter photographs in here too, and of course, I love the winter. If you're familiar with my other work, so that's something that it's that finding the time when you see this, when the roads are actually still maintained and still possible, and you just have patches of snow, but you can still make it. And I was a little sketchy, but I was able to probably be among the last vehicles that were in the Highlands before the first real big snow. And at that point, of course, you need some experience and you need to watch the weather. They do have some great weather resources, and you just have to be abreast of the situation. And essentially, I got out, and the next day, unless you're local and you go in with two jeeps, so you can pull each other out if something happens, and you've got a whole lot more experience driving Highlands than what I have, then you can still do it. But there's not many people, certainly not many foreigners that are willing to do that. And you see these signs, right? So, of course, you gotta have tourists that are gonna ignore this, but I just wanted to really make sure to talk about this because if you're trying to go on your own, you really have to be careful and you have to look at this. And you see, this says 4x4 XL, so that means that your, Suzuki Vitara is not gonna make it, right? And you very likely want a snorkel and you want larger than regular tires, so you want a modified vehicle, right? So just be extra safe when you do that because stuff like this, it's hard to see, but this is actually a road, and then it stops right here, and you see there's still pilings here. And if I could have made it up here, then maybe I could have continued up there. This is like there's these drifts that come in, but there was, of course, absolutely no way. And sometimes, they close the road and then you know it ahead of time. But, this previous slide here, this just happened. There was no sign, there was no warning, just turned a corner and this happened. So just always be weary of this situation, right? Because this is not what you want to be, right? And this even was in an area where you can not really see it, but this actually had this had a bit of a gravel part on the road, right? And yeah, don't be that kind of guy, right? Just be absolutely safe if you're gonna try and do it. Or, if you don't know, then you can book a tour. There's lots of tours of like local drivers that take you into the Highlands, and then of course you can explore that kind of area. But before you do it yourself, do some research, talk to people that have done it, and definitely be extra safe. This was me years and years ago being rescued because I actually slid off the road and got stuck in the snow. Wasn't super bad, and I had my extra blanket and food and lots of gas. I could keep the car running if I needed some heat. So that part was good, but still, happened to me too, and then never again. I mean, it's just then you got to be extra careful. And I didn't try to take this guy into the Highlands, but I couldn't resist put it in there because I've had my share of breakdowns in Iceland. So it happens, and this is of course a paved road, but this is the comfortable camper. So I've done everything, from family cars to like big campers like this, all the way to the modified vehicles. And this is a shot from a drone, of course, and this is, I guess, this is probably, if you can talk about an iconic location in the Highlands, then this would be one of it, because it just stands out, right? To have this volcano with the moss cover in green in basically a black sand beach. I mean, to me, that's just a dream. And not always easy to get there. You definitely have to check the rivers. There's lots of deep rivers, but people have, but there's a good sizable number of people that make it there. This was when we did this, this was a full size Land Cruiser as well, and we had a roof tent. So this is not as comfortable as the Volkswagen Transporter van that I showed you earlier, because here you're in a roof tent. But of course, this is even better in this kind of environment. So if you don't want to be constantly driving in and out because there's not many hotels, there's not many gas stations. If you kind of just want to get to a place and stay there, then, the camping makes a lot of sense. So even though it was quite rustic, we made it, and we had the benefit of, just going where we wanted and crashing, and then being able to photograph in the conditions that we were looking for, right? At sunrise or sunset, or just being there and not having to get back out was definitely a great benefit, right? And you see this is another picture, from another angle, and this is the thing that I really love about the Highlands is that, just like anything in Iceland, really, the weather changes constantly. Conditions are so important. Conditions are everything, right? And I love active weather because it means you can come back to the same location on a different day, or I mean, 2 hours later, and you're gonna find different photographic opportunities. I love that. It's active. There's stuff is happening, and as long as you are willing to be flexible, right? Planning is kinda hard, because of the weather being so rapidly changing. But if you are a little bit flexible and you're willing to embrace the conditions, then I think you're gonna have a lot of fun, going there. This is a black and white version, and of course, with this water level really, changes, and I find that if this wouldn't be there, if it's all black, it just wouldn't be the same, even if I back up here again, right? Imagine this without all those water veins, it wouldn't be as interesting. Sure, you have the green stand out, from essentially that dark ground, which is pretty cool, but I just love all those leading lines of the water, that's leading towards it. So that's pretty cool. Um, I have this little video. Let's see if this works on the webinar. It might not be totally fluid for you, but I thought I'd just gonna let that run to give you an idea. This was a dash cam that I had, and gives you a little bit of an idea of what the scene can look like. This was that last day before the real snow came down. So this I was still kind of comfortable with, but it was, it can take 2 hours if the snow really comes in 2 hours, you can't get out. So, and there was certainly I didn't meet anybody all day driving through this, so, it was getting a little bit uncomfortable, but I would also lie if I said that I don't like a little bit of a little bit of adrenaline every once in a while, and I knew many exits that were shortcuts to get out. So, and I was monitoring the weather, of course, but as you can see, it's pretty rough. And, even with the snow, I mean, you could see the track, and there have been cars there before. You can see there is a track still, but this is what I mean, right? This is not really a road, but look at this landscape. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than this. I think it's just so incredibly beautiful. It's not easy to photograph, but it just gives you conditions that I haven't really been to any other country where you feel like you're that far away, and you really aren't, because it is still somewhat accessible, right? If you know what you're doing and if you got the right equipment, it's still very accessible, and you're not, days from, like, the next stop or the next gas station, or, the next place to find some food, right? So, to me, it will never cease to be interesting. I mean, I'm looking forward to my next 20 trips and then some more, because I know, at some point, the South Coast and the Ring Road has I've kinda done that, even though different conditions, still will call for, exciting, photography opportunities. But I think this environment is just absolutely incredible, because, the day before there was no snow, and it was completely different, right? And so it's really, really very, very special. So I think it gives you a little bit of an idea of what things look like. This was a location that I actually went to with, Bruce Percy, who some of you might know, incredible photographer. He's done a lot of work in the Highlands as well, and, I quite loved it. It was a miserable, miserable day, when we got there, and, it's hard to get a feeling for the proportions here, but I can tell you that well, I mean, actually, I don't know. I wasn't gonna hike it, but I would think it's probably 2 kilometers from those rocks in the foreground to that mountain in the back, probably longer, right? Like, you can just keep on going, and the fact that you have, these rocks in the foreground, which is kind of a traditional landscape composition, right? Foreground, middle ground, background. And of course, that mountain is just really, really powerful with that top, right? Like it's got lots of visual presence. And having the rocks in the foreground, then you have this composition kind of um, uh, set up. But and I liked it, but I also felt like, I guess it's also the fact that I went there with other photographers, and so I thought it's good, but maybe I can do something else there. Like it was on my radar to go back. You can see here how like the camera was completely wrapped up, and at some point, it didn't matter how much wrap I had. Even for me, like I was like we were all drenched down right to the socks and underwear and everything, right? Like it was quite something. But it was not until this version until I feel like I got something special. And this is totally luck. I've probably been to this place 10 times, now. And it's different every time. I try to photograph it every time, and I try to not get discouraged when I feel like the conditions aren't sort of better or more unique than a visit before. I always give it my best, or I try to anyway. And I think that's important. But this day, of course, what makes it, and I think you can see my mouse, what makes it is that the clouds, the moving clouds here have this hook which mimics the hook in the mountain. And you see the foreground is different too. Like I try to look for these rocks that are just laying around, and you just walk around. And because this area is so vast, you actually have a lot of opportunities to put something together. And it is minimal in the sense that this is all just black sand, right? Like it's like a black sand desert. But this rock, of course, is really important too. It's different than all those small little rocks. It does have a lot of presence too, but because of this, this just really makes it. And that's I didn't know what exactly I wanted to take the other photograph to another level, um, but let's just say it paid off that I had the persistence to come back. Um, Cat, sorry. So that video, I missed that post there from you, the question. So the video I showed was actually October. Okay, so the Highlands usually shut down late September, early October. Like that's when the snowfall comes and they don't clear the roads, right? And that video that I showed you was about, I think it was the 10th of October, something like that, or the 5th. Was It was fairly late. I was lucky that you could still actually get to those areas. Depending on the year, it can be as early as late September, right? And once there's a good snowfall, then there's just no chance that you're going to be able to go there anymore because the roads then, I mean, the roads are there, but the snow just keeps piling up, and there's just no way that you can do it, right? Um, Thanks, Sandy. Thanks for coming anyway, and yeah, make sure to watch the recording. So this is my favorite lake, I can say. I think in all of Iceland, but happens to be in the Highlands, not very far away from the last photograph I showed you. And this is with rain approaching. So this was an interesting challenge in terms of I liked the idea of slowing down the shutter speed a little bit so that I would get the water a little cleaner, right? I didn't want all the ripples and little waves. So I wanted a long exposure, but I didn't want to go too long because I wanted to keep some of what's going on back here. This is the real rainstorm moving in, and literally, 5-10 minutes later, we got drenched there as well because it just moved right above us. But this, and I don't in fact remember exactly what it was. I think it was maybe 10 seconds, something like that. So it's a little bit of a long exposure, but not too long, because I wanted to, keep some of the integrity back there so you can see that the weather is kind of moving in. And what I love about this, of course, is all these shapes, like this hook that's here, to me, that really makes this photograph. And every time I've been visiting this lake, it it looked different, right? Like the shore looks different every single time. So it's pretty cool. Um, so let's move on. So this is the same lake, um, but um, this is just a different vantage point, a different day, and as I said, like it looks completely different. And now this part here is coming out, and just with all that negative space of all the black sand in the front, I think it's just yeah, I love it. I could photograph this lake forever. Then this is the lake again, right? And this particular day, there was just the water here, and I guess this hung out here, and there was the sand around it, and it just kind of worked. And again, just incredible clouds that are exploding. I mean, it's hard. It's really, really hard not to take a great photograph in this area. You have to work for it, and this lake, a lot of people would drive right on by and wouldn't get out, right? And that's another thing that I've learned the longer I've been a photographer is to try and invest some time in something that I might not know what the outcome is. So in other words, there's a lake. It looks like I can walk, not around it, but I can walk closer from the road. Well, I'm just going to park and I'm going to walk down there and I'll see where it takes me. And maybe I'll get a photograph, but maybe I won't, I don't know. So it's a bit of a risk in the sense that, if you're on a time budget, you got your 10 days that you're gonna be in Iceland and you wanna get the most out of it, that only makes sense. But I think even if I'm on a time budget, I try to carve out those kind of times because more often than not, I've been able to find something that completely surprises me, and that's what photography is to me, right? It's a surprise. It's the going there not knowing actually what I'm gonna get, and I know with that approach, I'm different to a lot of other photographers, um, and of course, it's not like I do that always, like, I also sometimes I have some ideas of some preconceptions of what I want to photograph, of course, and I have some things on the map, and I'm gonna, head there, but I try to always be open to come across something that I wouldn't have thought of before, right? And then I think what's important is to also try some different things. So you see, a lot of this work that I'm showing you isn't necessarily finished. So I'm still working on all of this. In fact, I'm working on a book of Iceland. So I'm looking at all these different options. But it's okay to photograph it in square, which I love, and then I also wanted to do some in panoramic format. This is actually a double square, so it's kind of like a 6 by 6 and then another 6 by 6, so it's a 1:2 aspect ratio, right? And of course, again, it's this hook that makes it. It's this one little inconsistency, and I just love that. Um, thanks, Alex. Yeah, well, I keep talking about let's see if it actually comes out, but I'm gonna try and make it. This one puzzles me, and I was actually, I was there, on a private trip with a client, um, when was that? 2 years? No, that was it in the I want to say it's 2 years ago. Can't remember now exactly. I think it was right after the pandemic when Iceland already opened, and we photographed this together, and she has a similar photograph of this, and we just discussed it as part of our, mentoring program that I'm doing with her. And the hard part that my difficulty with this photograph is that it goes you're photographing into a wall, right? Like this mountain range here isn't really that exciting. There's no tip, there's no right. It's just like a wall of black. Of course, I still think this photograph is worth taking because I just love this line of the lake, right? Like all these different ripples, and you also had to get the camera higher up so you can actually see this. So this was one of the examples where you don't want the camera right down on the ground because then you would be able to pick this up. But of course, in a perfect world, you'd have this one tall mountain in the middle that has a lot of presence, right? Which this you don't get. But anyway, I think this is I still think this is pretty cool. So, oh, thank you, Kat. Now I just got a text with a question. That's interesting. So look how cool I was here. Um, Oh, that's a good question, Catherine. Okay. So this is another thing that you may have noticed. Look at this one too, and look at this one. The black actually isn't fully black, right? That's what the question was. So that's intentional. So the way I process this is that the blacks aren't fully black. The whites are also not fully white either. There's tons of contrast. I love these contrast edges, right, between quite the light water and the dark, black sand. I love that, and I wanted to keep that, but it is actually not fully black and also not fully white. And it's a look that I quite like, and it's different though from this one, for example, and it's certainly different from this one because these I think were 2019, so these are like 4 years. Oh, that's crazy. Um, these are like 4 years old already. So at that time, I was still into really strong contrast. I mean, these still have contrast, but it is a contrast that is a little bit different. And I quite like that look. I've been working with it a little bit, so um, that is intentional. Oh, and no problem, Catherine. I just have my phone right here. I was like, let's be like completely on multiple channels here. So I thought I'll answer it because I think it's a good question. So this is intentional, and you'll notice this later on too, right? And I think actually in this example, it really works well because if this was completely black, I think it would be a bigger issue that you're kind of photographing into this wall, right? I feel like this, it almost gives you the perception or the illusion almost as if there is some detail there, right? And I mean, there is detail. I mean, this is sand, and if you zoom in, right, you do see, well, a bunch of sand, but really there isn't a whole lot of detail. Like it's not like there's rocks that stand out or other subject matter that stands out. But if I feel like this, it's not as harsh. If you make this fully black, it doesn't have that kind of softness that I want. So another one of that same lake, like it keeps on giving, right? And again, different aspect ratios, and that's definitely a tip that I try to give everybody. Once you found something and you feel like, wow, I'm in this spot right now, then almost treat it like stock photographers used to do that. Horizontal, vertical, zoomed out, zoom in, and even though I'm not advocating that you're taking 50 different pictures in every location, and you got a big zoom lens on, and you're going through the zoom range, and you're like I'm not advocating that. But what I am advocating is that once you find something that you think works, a few versions aren't bad, but be intentional about those versions. Okay. Um, there's another one of 2019, right? So this has that contrast again, looks a little bit different. And this is just, this is that sweet spot. Like I try to go to the Highlands in September. I'm going to go again this September too, with two clients on a private workshop, and I'm going to try and extend by a week or so, and see what if I can find this kind of. I hope that I find this already, during the time I go with my clients, because this is the time when you have some snow, but it's not so snowy that you can't get through, right? This is that sweet spot. I find the snow really adds something, and I mean this was a gift, right? This was actually snow that lasted all summer. This was just a ravine, and the snow was, I guess, so deep that it never really melted all over the summer. And when I saw that, and then I saw that there was a single cloud kind of drifting, and there was a few more clouds coming, but there was that single cloud was ahead, and I didn't see anything else around. And I literally had to photograph this from my driver's seat. Like I always, when I go alone photographing, I have my camera on the passenger side, the passenger seat. So if I need to, I actually can be quick. And it seems crazy to be quick like this in landscape photography, but this is one of the examples where literally 5 minutes later, if I had set up my tripod and got ready, framed it all up, other clouds were in the picture. So this was really kind of a decisive moment. I needed to photograph it right there and then, and I couldn't really wait. Right, I wouldn't have gotten it like that. Um, Again, kind of classical foreground, middle ground, background, and again, that active sky, lots of contrast that, kinda just makes it, right? But then, I'm not afraid, like, I another thing I try to work on in my photography, and I try to I would like to, tell you to try and do that as well, because I'm certainly working on it. Doesn't mean that I'm always able to do it, but, not being so focused on subject matter, right? But instead look beyond the subject matter, and here, my subject matter is not the road, right? The subject matter is the curvature, is the shape of the road. And yes, it's a road that goes to, a big waterfall in the Highlands, and that's actually, where lots of people go. So I don't think anybody has ever really photographed this. But to me, it was just a beautiful shape. And this was literally me, standing on the seat, popping the sunroof in the car so that I could get as high as possible. I didn't wanna stand on the roof of the car, 'cause I'm not sure if it's strong enough, but I could definitely stand on the seat and come through the sunroof. And so that allowed me to get this angle and still be high enough that you can see this part, especially this part here. You don't want this to be interrupted. You want this to be continuous, right? And yes, it's a road that, if you're looking at this and you're just thinking subject matter, you might say, "Well, I'm not gonna photograph a road." And I even believe that this way marker is really important, right? Visually, not a great subject matter, but visually, it puts you in a frame. It needs to be there, so I didn't even have to take anything out, right? This is as simple of post-production as possible. It shows up a little bit too bright. I usually have it darkened down. I don't know, maybe I grabbed the wrong version for the presentation. I'm just seeing that now. I want this to be a little bit darker. This was quite a sunny day, right? Which I needed the sun for the light to reflect off the road, but everything has pros and cons, right? The con on it was that also it reflected a lot more on, the black sand, right? So on an overcast day, this would be nice and black, but then, if you don't get that light reflecting off the road, the photograph doesn't work, right? So, every condition, right? Like this was photographed on a blue sky day with the sun out. I don't care. I don't think there's bad light. There's no such thing as bad light, right? This is an example where if that was a different kind of light situation, it wouldn't have worked. And this was pretty much noon as well, like middle of the day. This is waking up in Kalingafjord, which is a beautiful area of the Highlands that just got a new resort. They completely redone everything, and of course, everything got about 3 times as expensive as it's before. So we were there and actually had that was on the trip where we had the Land Cruiser with the roof tent, so we actually could crash right on top there. And this is just, I think this was like I don't think it was still in operation. I think this is an old toilet hut or maybe, some tools and supplies for the road management. I couldn't go in, but again, it wasn't so much that hut I was photographing. I love that triangle, right, of light. And this is this is the area where you turn around and you can walk into this area where you have these steam vents and, these, meandering rivers that come through. I mean, you can just spend a couple days just in this one particular area. And of course, you can hike everywhere, like you can hike everywhere in the Highlands anyway, but this is a beautiful, hiking area, particular beautiful hiking area. So that's definitely on the recommendation list. Oh, there actually is a question right here now. Let me just check that. Oh, there's 2 questions. Okay. Oh, never mind, it's not a question. That's okay. No problem. Oh, but there is one. Would you go to Iceland in springtime, and when does that happen as a no oh, well, springtime, I've been to Iceland almost any time of year, and springtime is interesting because for one, you don't get a lot of tourists, but, springtime, you cannot get to the Highlands, right? Or if you do, you have to hire some crazy locals that will take you there. That will be very, very expensive, and, like, I'm talking I think the 2 guys that are doing it are about 4,000 a day or something like that, 3,500 a day, something like that. So it's because you have to be kinda crazy to go when in the spring, it's the most snow cover typically. So if you go then, it's pretty insane. Usually, the Highlands open in June, June to July, then it opens and stays open, as I said, till about late, September, up to most middle of October, right? But if you go in the springtime to the West Fjords or even along the ring road at that time of year, I think it's quite interesting because that's not gonna be that many tourists then because they come in the summer, right? And that's what's kinda great about going to Iceland, these days right now, like June, July, August. Definitely avoid the ring road then because it's just insane with tourists. But the Highlands are great, and you got, pretty much 24-hour daylight or, call it 22, at least 20 hours, right? So, um, the other way you can do this is you can photograph actually from about 10 PM till 2 AM or so. And at that point, you're gonna be, among only some diehard people that are still out at that time, right? So that's one way you can deal with it too. This is also photographed from that area close to what, the last photograph was. This is actually a 60-minute exposure, so that's a 1 hour long exposure. This is a sun trail, so this is the sun, rising, and actually it's moving out of frame, and this is just probably some humidity, like, some kind of a cloud layer that was actually below us. This is a little bit higher, this area where we stayed, and we had frost in the morning when we woke up, and this cloud kinda hung out in the valley. This was a beautiful overview where you could look down, and it's just a different kind of photograph, right? If I wouldn't tell you what it is, it's, hard to know what it is, and it's really, once again, the shapes, is the horizontalness of the, the clouds versus, this one, being at almost like a 45-degree angle, like, it's that kind of triangle that's being suggested. That's why I wanted to photograph it. It's not the typical view over, "Oh, look at, this little town that's down in the valley." I mean, you can't even see it even though there is some stuff down there, but it's all black. You can't see it. Um, Catherine is asking what, filter for 1 hour. Well, it depends. Um, 15 stop is usually good for 15, 16 stops is usually good for at least 15 minutes, and if you're willing to go to f22, then you can go to an hour, or if you're photographing in the morning or the evening when the light is actually not fully out or if it's heavy overcast, you can get to 1 hour that way. But I also do have an 18 stop filter, and even a 20 stop filter. So, I can go for an hour even when it's super, super bright, out there. But I have to say it's pretty rare that I use those because, because they're very, very, very dark. I think this was a 16 stop filter, and just, stopped down quite a lot, and also this back was, 50 ISO, so that helps too, right? If you have a camera that you can drop the ISO down, then of course also helps you go longer. This is, another, quite beautiful area, like, for years, this was one of those iconic spots that I don't know when I first saw pictures of this, but this was one of those areas where I was like, "I need to find this," and I actually spent some time. I even asked my friend Hilmar from the lighthouse if he knew where this was, and he tried to talk to some people, and they didn't really know. I mean, I didn't really try that hard, but it was on my list. I kind of one day I wanted to find it, and then found it. And it's basically just this valley with this waterfall. I think at this point it's not so secret anymore because when I was there were a few Instagrammers around, and then I went back there again last year when I was in Iceland with my family. And we were there in October, and even in October, there were still some Instagrammers around, so you can't get rid of them, apparently. So now it's not so secret anymore, but, doesn't matter, it is absolutely beautiful and a great hike nonetheless, to go up there. um, and so when we were up there, that time was quite miserable, and it was raining, and we were kinda hoping that the rain would stop at one point, and it didn't. But I kind of, in the end, I kinda like this, and it's interesting, with color and ice, and you can see it here. That's why I put it in there. There's so much green. It's insane, right? And it's almost, I mean, there's all these different hues of green. It's obviously not just one, and it's green and yellows and reds and, I mean, all this oranges. It's all these incredible hues, but it can be overwhelming, and when you turn it into black and white, you kinda lose all that. Right now, I'm not really looking at the canyon walls anymore. That's one of the things that black and white does. Like, this is kind of all the same thing, and now what comes out, of course, is, and I dodged the waterfall, so I made the waterfall stand out, made it a bit brighter, right? But now you're looking at the waterfall and, of course, this meandering river on the bottom, of this valley, and that's, of course, what the picture that, I mean, I had in mind, because that's actually one of the examples where I saw a photograph from, and I always wanted to stand there and do it, right? And, again, for the record, I'm not against photographing iconic spots or iconic locations, but, I think there should be a healthy mix of, first of all, doing it your way, and then not just making your entire trip be about those iconic locations, right? But actually put in a bunch of things that maybe is not as iconic, and then, if you're gonna do this too, then sure. And this waterfall, is an example where I found this by chance. It's one of those things where, you see the camera here. This is from years ago. This was still on a, I think this was the Nikon days. Not that important, but anyway, uh, this was a, um, this was a Nikon, and I photographed this. And when you look at the whole scene pulled back, you see that's where it is. But that's about where I parked, and then I had to hike in, and I didn't really see the front of the waterfall. I didn't really know what I would get. And it's one of those examples where I was like, "You know what? It's not gonna take that long." I mean, this took less than half an hour hike, to just see it. And if I go back here, I actually quite like this, because even that half an hour means, I mean, I haven't seen too many photographs of this waterfall, right? Because that's already far away. It's not off the ring. It's not off the ring road. Like, it's just makes it, kind of interesting, and makes it different than all the big, popular, Skoga falls and then some that are in Iceland, right? I have another one here. I couldn't resist but to put 2 videos in there. Again, this was that day when already there was quite a bit of snow, and more and more and more came. Um, and, I think this is where now we're going, at the very end, there's a little water crossing there and everything else. But, I mean, you get an idea how bare this landscape is. And if you look out here, this would be very, very hard to come up with something, but again, this is the opposite of iconic. Like, you really have to try and make it work. See, this water crossing can be quite treacherous, in the summer when there's more flow. I got super lucky. The whole time when I was there, actually, the water was quite low, and that made it easy. I mean, the challenge was actually the snow when I went and did this trip. But all the rivers were low, and water crossings were rather easy. So, but that's something, that's something that, of course, you have to do the research on. Um, Again, right, like, this is just a highway, which, when you think about it, might not be something that might intrigue you to photograph, but to me, there was just something about it. Again, I'm not taking this guy out, like this highway marker out, because that's the point where the viewer ends up to, and then this beautiful line that takes you right there, and then, just some beautiful snow in the back. And this was not me, very important. This must have been, well, I don't know, it could have been other tourists, actually. But, of course, this is what they mean when they say off-road driving is illegal in Iceland. This would be off-road driving. This would be the illegal bit, right? And I find this, I cannot understand why people do this, because you have these established tracks. And if you stay on those established tracks, believe me, you will feel like you're going off-road, right? But there is a track that's already been there, so you're not destroying anything. I mean, this is already there. But if you're going off like this could be years old. It takes a long, long time until this goes back. And, so this is just something that I mean, it's the stupidest thing ever, but I have to admit, as a photograph, it was kind of intriguing. So, so when I came across this, I thought, "Wow, it just doesn't get much more minimal than that. Just, black sand with just enough dusting that you can still see those, marks from, the other cars, doing some donuts or being stupid, right? And, of course, for photograph, it makes sense, but please don't ever do that, when you're there. Right? I mean, the winter transforms the landscape, and I got really lucky here because I was driving by. This is a lake that's covered with snow, and I was hoping I would get some kind of foreground, and I was driving for a few minutes, just going by the lake and thinking, "Man, give me something," and then this kinda opening in the ice happened to be there, and I was like, "My god, that's just a photography gift." And you drive that same area in the summer, and you wouldn't even stop. I mean, it's beautiful, it's a great mountain range in the back, but it doesn't have anywhere close the kind of appeal that it has in winter. So and even, something as boring as these, wind turbines, right? And this was actually blowing snow, very, very little visibility, and kinda scary. Another one of those. I mean, I had a good car once again, but I changed my plans and I stayed at there's one hotel in the Highlands, which is actually even called the Highland Hotel, and it's in the Southern Highlands, but I actually stayed there because this storm got kinda scary, and this is even on a paved road still, so I knew that is actually a road that they're going to maintain. Might take a few days, but the paved roads, they are actually keeping it open. And I didn't go any deeper in, I just changed my plans, but, there's just something about it. Um, and again, just very, very simple, 2 different options, right? I have as I showed you guys before, I have the, panoramic and the square that I always love. Of course, it's this simple foreground element here that it's not really a crack, but it looks like a crack. Um, this one was really, fun to make. This was, definitely inspired by Bruce Percy, because 'cause he showed well, he didn't show me this location because he actually went with a couple other people. I never made it there, but then I saw the photographs that people took, and I was like, "Hmm, okay, this is one of those things I have to try for myself." And it was a really fun exercise, to try and do this. And this is, I actually to a lot of my students and mentees, I give, assignments where they have to, mimic other photographers' work, for work that they're inspired by. And so I find this is a very valuable, exercise. I would not sell this image, right, or this photograph, even though it is a slightly different composition just because I didn't know exactly where Bruce was standing, and there is a couple options there along a trail where you can stand in different spots, and of course, also this one really highly depends on what kind of, focal length you're using, for the compression, and of course, the conditions are all different too. So this photograph doesn't really look exactly like his, but it is, of course, very similar, and as I said, I have no problem saying that it's definitely inspired by him. So, so this is but it was fun. It was really interesting for me, to work with it, and it took me a good amount of time, and it wasn't so much that I really wanted to end up with this. I just enjoyed going through the paces and seeing what options were there for creating compositions, right? And it was kind of a narrow path, but you could really walk a large area. And I walked and I switched lenses and I walked down, I walked up, I walked back and also like it was really worthwhile spending a few hours to try and do that, and I definitely um, encourage everyone to try it, so you can see a little bit like what that looks like in real life. This was shot with a Leica monochrome, so just a, you know, the little Q2, so this is, essentially a point and shoot camera, but it photographs in black and white only, which is really powerful and, like a Phase One that also makes cameras that shoot in black and white only, and yeah, was just a nice thing. This is, one of the many crater lakes that you can, hike up to and have these incredible views, right? You can see also that's from a recent trip. Um, power lines, like, this one was interesting because you kinda had to be I felt like you had to be a little precise on your location here, like, you notice how I don't know if I can zoom in. Notice how this is actually pretty close to the middle, and I felt like if this was off a little bit, it would be annoying, right? So it's attention to little details, you know? Um, this was really, really fun. It's again, it's the same idea of foreground, middle ground, background, mostly this foreground piece here with, these really interesting mountains in the back. And this I mean, this was a big beach, and I had gone out with a client, and we were photographing the big vista, and at some point, I saw this little piece, and I've been back to this location since, and this requires a very particular I didn't realize it, but there's not really a tide, but of course, the water level does change in these lakes, and I've only ever been there that one time where the water level was perfect. Because if the water is lower, then this becomes too large. If the water becomes higher, then of course this disappears. Then the photograph doesn't work. So once again, when you're there, you have to take advantage of it. And I'm happy that I spent, a lot of time, and we actually changed our day, our schedule, what we wanted to do later on, because we worked on this for quite a while, and I'm happy we did it because you just never know what would have happened later on, and maybe would have never gotten to, that destination for that day anyway. And you just that's how I like to run my trips now, right? Where if I see something and I feel like it's worth it to spend some time, I will spend the time, and then I know I get it because you might not be able to get back, right? Or if you can get back, you're not gonna get, um, the same, you're not gonna get the same, result, right? So you better take it right now while you can. This is another shout out, mm, to Bruce, and this one was really fun because he actually came up to me, when I had set up here and was quite happy, that I found this composition that he photographed as well. If you go to his website, you see his version of it. We actually chatted afterwards, and I sent him my version. He sent me his. It was quite interesting because that just proves the point that we were standing literally in this one, we were standing right next to each other, not like the one in the mountain where I didn't know exactly where he stood. But here we were pretty well shoulder to shoulder, and we have completely different results. And this is what I love about teaching too, because you can't you can go out with a whole group of people, and they're all gonna get slightly different photographs. I just love that, right? Um, yeah, that's why I had to put this in. Again, about the shapes, beautiful, moody weather, some more shapes, right? These are actually look at this. This is essentially the same location, but a little bit further down on that beach compared to this. So this is black sand, right? But here you have that contrast again, right? Where I made it quite dark, so it ends up being you don't really see detail here, right? Here you see a little bit more detail, and here you see a bit more detail too, but it's that same beach. That's a glacier, and again, it's, the shapes, how it's coming in. Beautiful rain in the back, creating, these layers within the mountains. This was, well, shout out to Alex for this one 'cause, he actually said, "Let's stop the car. I think you would like this, Mark." And, we did, and, well, here's the photograph, right? So, I actually did take it, and, it's very similar, right? It's similar to the one I showed you just a few seconds ago, just in a different location and kind of vice versa because here now this band is the white water rather than the black sand beach, right? So it kind of works in similar ways. Again, crazy. This was actually not fog or haze. This was actually a sandstorm. And this was just absolutely insane because it got into everything. It got into, I mean, well, when I stepped in the shower that evening, and I looked down, there's just a bunch of black sand, and I was like, "Well, where's that coming from?" So so obviously it had gone through all the layers of clothing. It had even gotten into one of my lenses. It, certainly had gotten into all the cameras, like, it's just horrible, horrible stuff. Um, and that's one point for going there with a film camera, even one that is not that expensive, where you can actually buy a replacement for more reasonable than another digital camera because this is not always a great environment. This is actually on film. Might not really look like it, but this is just again just on a fairly hill. There's some clouds. The sun was out and was out enough to give me that skipping light of the foreground, right? That's seen in the water. I love this too. This is also, I think this is my favorite lake too, once again, that didn't make it in the earlier cut. But, again, just love that. Give an idea what the area looks like in color. These are just some iPhone snaps that I threw in. You see here's my camp spot, and of course, the benefit of having a car like this is you can just, you can have a snack, make yourself even a coffee. You could, if you wanted to, you can hang out for a bit, take out your laptop, work on some photographs, go out, shoot some more. I mean, it's just lots of benefits for having campers like that. And there's a reason that they're popular in Iceland because I think it really makes sense, to use them for that. And then you just have all those opportunities. You can just crash wherever you want to. I mean, I talked about that before, right? And then just again, different versions of just playing with the foreground, leading lines, beautiful mountains in the back, so many opportunities there, right? And this was difficult, but I just loved just these few tufts of grass, and then there's just a little bit of mountains in the back. And I when I looked at this when I prepared the presentation, I wasn't sure if I 'cause this is uncropped, and I think this actually would work in a square, but I haven't actually gotten to a square yet, so this is definitely something I haven't published. But I still wanted to share it with you so you could see sort of what I'm after. And even, once again, I should actually make a whole series on these, um, road, I keep forgetting what they're called, road markers, right? Because I think here, again, it's essential, right? It's between these 2 hills, you need to have this, and I moved around so that I get it to the point where it is there, right? And yeah, most photographers would probably say, "Why you would photograph this?" Right? But to me, this is totally fun. Like, this is why the Highlands are great because you have this minimalism, you have this absence of iconic locations, but you have a whole bunch of black sand. And then, if you look around and there's a little, mountain somewhere that you can then think about, okay, how am I gonna use this? Then you still have some water and that, depending on the weather, might reflect some light. Like, there's still, even though it looks like a very deserted kind of landscape, void of a lot, there is enough details to work with, and in a way, I find it actually, um, it's very educational, right? Even if this photograph never sees the light of day, you never publish it, you never sell it, I believe you'll learn something about photography if you make photographs like this, right? And it's an absolutely worthwhile exercise to try and come back with something from a scene like this, right? Um, oh, hey, Denise. Well, um, interesting. Well, I mean, I usually crop. I mean, I actually would I really like cameras that allow you to depends on what you're using, right? But if you have a digital camera that allows you to crop already in camera, I love to do that because there's nothing harder than looking at a 2:3 aspect ratio in camera, and then in the end, you want it to be a square, right? That's very, very hard to do. If the camera allows you to go square, and especially if it's a mirrorless camera, they usually allow you to do that, and then you only see the square already when you're composing. That's the best case scenario, right? My Phase One doesn't do that. Actually, my Leica doesn't do that either. I find that it's one of the most annoying things about the Leica that I'm looking at it in 2:3, but I'm thinking I want this to be square, right? So I have to kind of crop it afterwards. But then the second part of the answer is I crop very early on typically because the crop is really important, and the crop should be applied, I think, pretty early on, and then you can continue your work on the photograph, right? Because the crop will then determine also what you're gonna do in terms of other editing steps, right? So I think very rarely I might get to a point like here, apparently I didn't do it, right? And on the previous one, I didn't do it either, right? On this one, I didn't do either. Um, and still I applied a look to this already. So every once in a while, I'll start working, and then I might find after living with the image for a while, okay, no, this needs to be cropped more. But my intention is to do the cropping very early on in the workflow, if that makes sense. And that's great about film, of course, because when I show you the film work that I did with an X-Pan, which is a panoramic camera, I see it in that panoramic form when I press the shutter. I mean, that's the best case scenario, right? So then from the get-go, from the composing in camera, you already get the aspect ratio that you're gonna get in the end, right? Just moody days at the beach, more of the water reflecting the light, right? Okay, here we go. So here's some color work. These are untouched still. I'm just letting them marinate at the time. But I still wanted to run through them quick and show you because I've been quite enjoying using film as of late, and I can summarize for you what I enjoy about it. It's my way to explore color, and the reason that it is that for me is that I feel like when you know, I don't like to pick a color treatment afterwards. I feel almost like there's too many options, too many presets, too many buttons, too many sliders to move around. And I just, color is hard for me. Like black and white is easy, but color is really hard for me. It's a challenge, and I feel like picking a film stock that already makes a decision of the color palette for me by picking that film. I don't have to. Yes, I could put this into Lightroom and I can mess around with the color, but I won't do that. I wanna go with what the film gives me, and it's not reality, right? I mean, this particular film, this is CineStill, so this is like a movie film stock that, gives you a particular you see how this doesn't really like, has a lot of green in it, like it's a particular color treatment. And I embrace that. That's what I wanna work with. And you see, this is a familiar location, but this camera, of course, treats it differently. Now I have this bigger than 2 by 1. It's almost a 3 by 1. Um, it's almost a 3 to 1 aspect ratio now, right? And, um and that's really challenging, but the reward is that if you break this kinda camera out and you go even to the iconic spots, you're gonna be forced to come back with unique compositions anyway, right? You still have to make it work, but because this is so different from 99% of other people, right, that you're gonna end up with, I feel, something interesting. So that was my idea. And also, I love the way that this camera is pretty automatic. I don't have to think about a bunch of custom features. Like I can just look through. I see in the viewfinder what the final crop's gonna be, right? That's what I really enjoy, and I can just work on my seeing rather than working on, "Oh god, I have to set this custom feature, and then what ISO am I set at?" And blah, blah, blah. I don't wanna do that. Like, this is on automatic. I'm just looking through it, and I'm trying to make the photograph work. So, I'm gonna kinda cycle through here. These are scans, as you can see, of the original film still, and I'm actually getting higher quality scans made. These are just the ones that come with development. So these are just I think these are 8 megapixel or something like that. So there are plenty for a presentation like this. Love this Canon too, but they're not gonna print that particularly well right now. Um, but it's just there's a certain look to it, right? And I enjoy that. You see hopefully, you see also what I'm focusing on again is these shapes, right? It's just this is the road that goes up, but unfortunately, there's all these other and I don't know exactly what this is. You see there's some more here where people, again, have driven sort of off-road and made, a bunch of, marks into the landscape, unfortunately, but it was, again, for photography, of course, it works, right? And all these overpasses going through and, you see by just standardizing on this film and not switching around, there is a certain look like, yeah, this is where people have just gone, right? What I just said, but there is a certain unity in the way that these images present, right? And part of that is that the film camera makes a lot of decisions for you, and I really embrace this. I actually think that digital it can be a paralysis because we just have too many features. Like, I don't need more Lightroom features. Just stop it, right? Like, I know everybody's always like, "Oh, no, what's the next feature? What's the next slider? What's the next thing I could do? What's the next software? What can it do? And AI and blah, blah, blah." And it's almost like, okay, AI is out of that discussion, but I don't want more sliders. Like, I still use Silver effects, for my black and white, and it's essentially the same as, like, 15 years ago, and it was good 15 years ago. It's still good today. I don't care. I don't need more sliders, right? Because it's just more things to dilute the process, I think. This is that, same place, that's that volcano from, really early on in the presentation, right? I actually drove through this river, so this was interesting. Somebody got stuck on this little island, right? But I think you really get a feel, and even in color, you might even get a better feeling of what that environment actually looks like, like, there's just something about it, and here, there's really I mean, I guess the car has been there, so, like, I took this as an established road, and in fact, well, this was actually on my map, so this was a road. Um, but, uh, not many I mean, this is just a handful of cars that have gone down that road, right? Not very many have gone down that road. Okay, and now one more treat, which is the, uh, the aerial photography, because that was mostly Highlands too. That's why I wanted to include this. So, I'm in a plane or I'm with a client, we're in this plane that's a little bit bigger than the one you see there, but I love that particular one. So, that's one of the pictures, and then you can see this is how we're, starting to go, and this particular one was a little Cessna, and you can see there's a window there, and that's how you photograph essentially, right? I had the back seat, so it wasn't as ideal, but that was okay since I was really the passenger and we were there, for my client, of course, for as a priority. Well, of course, he's got the better seat, but I still was able to snatch, some photographs. This is really why we did it. We really wanted to fly over the eruption, and it interesting enough wasn't that interesting anymore. We just, as luck would have it, we got there a little bit too late, right? Like, even a week before, there was a lot more of these, I think they're called fissures. So, I don't think I pronounced that very well, but, basically these veins of hot lava, those were everywhere, and of course that, was, for photography, that was pretty cool. I wasn't that interested in this because I feel like this is such an iconic shot, and how am I gonna do something that different? There was But that time it had been erupting for about 4 months, so there was a lot of pictures that we already saw. But of course, flying over it was incredible. I'm not gonna put that experience down. And this photograph of the phase one, so I mean, the detail is insane. So you can see, I was actually trying to look around if there's any people, and I didn't see a whole lot of people. But there is like, there's some equipment here that somebody had set up. Um, and there wasn't a whole lot of photography still being made at that time. And then once we were gone, I think a few weeks later, it started erupting again and was more interesting. So that's kind of the luck of the draw that you get there. But really, what of course is very cool in Iceland is these kind of scenes, and you can see it here from the video. These are essentially these glacier outflow rivers that have this crazy color. You want a little bit of sun. I mean, it was overcast, but the sun was still coming down. Like you definitely need some of the light again to reflect off. And again, this is something that's quite iconic. A lot of people have done it, and I haven't really done anything with my photographs of this, and I feel like this is almost like going to Japan is hard when you like going to Hokkaido in Japan is hard when you know of Michael Kenner, and this is like it's hard to do this if you know of Hans Strand, right? Because he's kind of taken that, and he's got I don't know how many thousands of hours in planes. So I'm not going to catch up ever, nor do I really want to. Right? He's established himself with that kind of work, which doesn't mean that I can't take something too. And I very very much enjoyed this experience, but but it is something that it's not is incredible, but it's not going to be something that that I'm going to do a whole lot with me on my end. Here's the color version, and then a black and white version of this one particular scene. And here there's just another example. I mean, that landscape is just so incredible, right? And this is actually taken from a drone, so I wanted to show you guys that too, because that's possible as well. Because those planes are about I think they're about 1,000 an hour, maybe even 1,200 an hour. So they're very pricey. So basically for like, an hour, certainly 2 hours, you can get yourself a drone, and then you can use it afterwards as well, right? And you can definitely get some photographs, even though, of course, I will say that the camera, first of all, isn't as good. And also, I felt like the drone doesn't really go quite high enough. Of course, with the plane, you can go a bit higher, and we were at about 1,000 meters in general, and the drones aren't allowed to fly 1,000 meters high, and they actually won't, unless you do some jailbreaking or whatever that's called. But again, it gives you a good idea of what this landscape looks like, right? With these river flows, and it is pretty otherworldly. I mean, it was on my bucket list for sure to do this, and I'm super thankful to Aubra for giving me that opportunity to come along. Like that was definitely a very very cool memory. And these are, I mean, it's hard not to take pictures of this, of course. But as I said, there's a lot of these around, and there's one other story with this is that the pilot that actually took us there, less than a year later, actually crashed and died, and not just him, but all the passengers on that flight with him together. And that shocks me to this day, actually. But it shocked me when I first heard that because, I mean, he was kind of Hans Strand flew with him too. Like he was the guy to hire to do this in Iceland. So he had so much experience. And for him to do that, and as far as I know, they never figured out exactly what the cause of the accident was. But makes me, that's the kind of thing. Like we do take risks for photography. Because of course this is in the name of photography, and that certainly has got me thinking. So this is again, this one is from a drone. These two are or three are from a drone. Um, but these colors are just, and you don't see it from the ground, right? You have to go up in order to see these. So there you have it. Thank you. Wow, I've actually done that under 2 hours. That's great. Well, thank you for your patience. Um, I have, couple more things. This just got confirmed a couple hours ago, so I thought I threw it in there. This is gonna be, what is it now? My 3rd workshop in Germany. So on the off chance, I mean, there's some people from Europe, if anybody's interested in, doing a workshop, in, Zingst, I'm gonna link this on my Instagram, profile, or you can, of course, reach out to me if you want more details on this. Or if you type in, Zingst is up here, workshops, then you're gonna find to it, and I'm gonna actually do this one together with, my good friend Alex. So Alex was the one that told me to stop and take that one photograph, but we did, an Iceland, island, tour together, and we've done a few things together, actually been to Vancouver Island together and all kinds of things, and I think it will be very interesting. We have different styles, but we also agree on a lot of things. So, it should be quite interesting, and, Things is a very interesting area too. So, um, thanks, Andy. It was great that you joined. That was a great trip we had. Lots of memories. I still think about that all the time. So, very, very special. And, this one, I have 1 seat left. This is, the next, workshop. That's the next time, September 17 to 23. This year is when I'm gonna be in the Highlands again. So this one is already linked on my profile. So, um, and if you go to my website, it's markkoegel, .com, there is a, workshop section. There's also the webinar section, right? And the story behind the photograph section. Like, there's a few resources there, but basically all my workshops are listed there. So if you're interested ever in doing something, then, there you have it. All right. I think now that is really it. I think that's the last. Yeah, that's really it. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. The recording should be ready in a few minutes, and, if there are any more questions maybe you didn't think about, you can still put them in, right, in the chat. I think the chat keeps working, and I will, and I will, answer them. Okay? Don't be shy. Okay. Thanks a lot, everybody. Hopefully see you again in the future. Keep watching the webinars. I do try to do at least 1 a month. All right? Okay. Bye for now. Thank you.